Chapter 19. It has come. Of course, Dr. Craven had been sent for the morning after Colin had had his tantrum. He was always sent for at once when such a thing occurred, and he always found, when he arrived, a white, shaken boy lying on his bed, sulky and still so hysterical that he was ready to break into fresh sobbing at the least word. In fact, Dr. Craven dreaded and detested the difficulties of these visits. On this occasion, he was away from Misselthwaite Manor until afternoon. "How is he?" he asked Miss Medlock rather irritably when he arrived. "He will break a blood vessel one of these fits some day. The boy is half insane with hysteria and self-indulgence." "Well, sir," answered Miss Medlock, "you'll scarcely believe your eyes when you see him. That plain, sour-faced child that's almost as bad as himself has just bewitched him. How she's done it, there's no telling. The Lord knows she's nothing to look at, and you scarcely ever hear her speak. But she did what none of us dare to do. She just flew at him like a little cat last night, and she stamped her feet, and she ordered him to stop screaming, and somehow she startled him so that he actually did stop. And this afternoon, well, just come up and see. It's just past crediting." The scene which Dr. Craven beheld when he entered the patient's room was indeed rather astonishing to him. As Miss Medlock opened the door, he heard laughing and chattering. Colin was on his sofa in his dressing gown, and he was sitting up quite straight. He was looking at a picture in one of the garden books, and talking to the plain child who at that moment could scarcely be called plain because of her face was so glowing with enjoyment. "These long spires of blue ones, we'll have a lot of those," Colin was announcing. "They're called delphiniums." "Deacon says they're larkspurs, made big and grand," cried Mistress Mary, "and there's clumps of those already." Then they saw Dr. Craven and stopped. Mary became quite still, and Colin looked fretful. "I am sorry to hear you were ill last night, my boy," Dr. Craven said, a trifle nervously. He was a rather nervous man. "I am better now, much better," Colin answered, rather like a young Rajah. "I'm going out in my chair in a day or two, if it is fine. I want some fresh air." Dr. Craven sat down by him, and he felt his pulse, and he looked at him curiously. "It must be a very fine day," he said, "and you must be very careful not to tire yourself." "Fresh air won't tire me," said the young Rajah. As there had been occasions when this same young gentleman had shrieked aloud with rage and had insisted that fresh air would give him a cold and kill him, it was not to be wondered at that the doctor felt somewhat startled. "I thought you did not like fresh air," he said. "I don't like it when I'm by myself," replied the Rajah, "but my cousin is going out with me." "And the nurse, of course," suggested Dr. Craven. "No, I will not have the nurse." So magnificently he said this that Mary could not help remembering how the young native prince had looked with his diamonds and emeralds and pearls stuck all over him, and the great rubies on the small dark hand as he waved to command his servants to approach with salams and receive his orders. "My cousin knows how to take care of me. I am always better when she is with me. She made me better last night. A very strong boy, I know, will push my carriage." Dr. Craven felt rather amazed and somewhat alarmed. If this tiresome, hysterical boy should, by chance, get well, he himself would lose all chance of inheriting Misselthwaite. But he was not an unscrupulous man, though he was a weak one, and he did not intend to let him run into actual danger. "He must be a strong boy and a steady boy," he said, "and I must know something about him. Who is he? What is his name?" "It's Deacon," Mary spoke up suddenly. She felt somehow that everybody who knew the moor must know Deacon, And she was right, too. She saw in a moment Dr. Craven's face relaxed into a relieved smile. "Oh, Deacon," he said. "If it's Deacon, you will be safe enough. He's as strong as a Moor pony is Deacon." "And he's trusty," said Mary. "He's the trustiest lad in Yorkshire." She'd been talking Yorkshire to Colin, and she forgot herself. "Did Deacon teach you that?" asked Dr. Craven, laughing outright. "I'm learning it as if it were French," said Mary, rather coldly. "It's like a native dialect in India. Very clever people try to learn them. I like it, and so does Colin." "Well, well," he said, "if it amuses you, perhaps it won't do you any harm. Did you take your bromide last night, Colin?" "No," Colin answered. "I wouldn't take it at first, and then after Mary had made me quiet. She talked me to sleep in a low voice about the spring creeping into a garden." "Well, that sounds soothing," said Dr. Craven, more perplexed than ever, and glancing sideways at Mistress Mary, sitting on her stool and looking down silently at the carpet. "You are evidently better. But you must remember—" "I don't want to remember," interrupted the Rajah. "When I lie by myself and I remember, I begin to have pains everywhere, and I think of things that make me begin to scream because I hate them so. If there was a doctor anywhere who could make you forget you were ill instead of remembering it, I would have him brought here." And he waved his thin hand, which ought really to have been covered with royal signet rings made of rubies. "It is because my cousin makes me forget that she makes me better." Dr. Craven had never made such a short stay after a tantrum. Usually he was obliged to remain a very long time and do a great many things. This afternoon he did not give any medicine or leave any new orders, and he was spared any disagreeable scenes. When he went downstairs, he looked very thoughtful, and when he talked to Miss Medlock in the library, she felt that he was a very puzzled man. "Well, sir," she ventured, "could you have ever believed it?" "It is certainly a new state of affairs," said the doctor, "and there's no denying it's better than the old one." "I believe Susan Sowerby's right, I do that," said Miss Medlock. "I stopped in her cottage on my way to Thwaite yesterday, and I had a bit of a talk with her. And she says to me, 'Well, Sarah Ann, she mayn't be a good child, and she mayn't be a pretty one, but she's a child, and children's need children.' We went to school together, Susan Sowerby and me." "Well, she's the best sick nurse that I know," said Dr. Craven. "When I find her in a cottage, I know the chances are that I shall save my patient." Miss Medlock smiled. She was fond of Susan. "She's got a way with her, has Susan," she went on. "I've been thinking all morning of one thing she said yesterday. She says, once, when I was giving the children a bit of a preach after they'd been fighting, I says to 'em all, 'When I was in school and my geography told us the world was shaped like an orange, and I found out before I was 10 that the whole orange don't belong to nobody. No one owns more than his own quarter, and there's times it seems that there's not enough quarters to go round. But don't you, none of you, think as you own the whole orange, or you'll find out you're mistaken, and you won't find out without hard knocks. What children's learn from children's,' she says, 'is that there's no sense in grabbing at the whole orange, peel and all. If you do, you're likely not even to get the pips, and they're too bitter to eat.'" "She's a shrewd woman," said Dr. Craven, putting on his coat. "Well, she's got a way of saying things," ended Miss Medlock, much pleased. "Sometimes I've said to her, I said, 'Hey, Susan, if you's a different woman, and you didn't talk such broad Yorkshire, I've seen the times when I'd have said you was clever.'